My name is Dr. Larry Nelson from Brigham Young University, and I'm happy to be here today. I'd like to begin today by telling a story about my daughter when she was 5 years old. We had been out celebrating her birthday, her 5th birthday, and as we returned home from celebrating, I said to her, "Jessica, I'm sorry, but it's time to go to bed. Go get in your pajamas, brush your teeth, and then come back to say goodnight to me." As she left to get ready for bed, I turned on the television. When she returned, I pointed to the television and said, "Jessica, who's that? Who's on TV?" And she said, "Dad," and she told me who it was. I said, "Nice job, Jess, you're right." To which she replied, with a tilt of a head and hands on her hips, "I know, Dad, I'm 5 now, and 5-year-olds know everything." While sometimes we may fall into that trap of thinking that we know everything, we don't. And I want you to know I don't come before you today claiming to know everything. However, I do want to share with you some things that we found as researchers time and time again in countries and cultures all over the world that work for parents and educators to help children. Because sometimes we're like my son. My 4-year-old son, I often see playing with puzzles. And sometimes he'll take a puzzle piece and try to put it in a spot that it doesn't belong. And instead of turning the piece and trying to get it correct, he just pushes harder and thinks somehow that will fit. But of course it doesn't. Sometimes as parents and educators, we do the exact same thing. We take something wrong and we think if we just do more of it, it will eventually work. Again, I don't come before you in your wonderful country to tell you that I know everything and what you're doing wrong. Instead, I simply want to share some things with you as teachers, educators, and parents that you can maybe use to do even more than you're doing so well already. So, I would like to discuss with you today some principles of parenting. And even though I'll be talking about parenting, these same principles apply for teachers and educators. And even though, again, I'll be talking to parents very much, it's because not only can this be used in the classroom, but you teachers can assist in getting the word out to parents. Because if we can help parents do the things that benefit their children, it of course will help you in the classroom. I'd like to begin then by discussing different aspects of parenting. In the 1970s, a researcher identified or labeled 4 different types of parenting. Based simply on a simple ratio of how warm or responsive a parent is compared to how demanding or controlling. So a parent who is warm and responsive and sets high expectations for children, we call those parents authoritative. Those parents who are very warm, very responsive, but have no rules, no control, and no expectations, we call permissive. Those parents who are very cold, very unresponsive, but very controlling, we call authoritarian. And finally, those parents who they're not warm, they're not controlling, they're just uninvolved, we call uninvolved parents. And we won't talk about those parents today. So let me begin, please, by discussing the authoritative parents. Authoritative parents are parents who are high in support, who emphasize control in the form of high expectations, grant autonomy appropriate for the child's age and abilities. These parents do all of the following. First, they make reasonable demands for maturity. In other words, all children are different. We should never try to teach or parent children who are 2 years of age like we would 8-year-olds, like we would 16-year-olds. we need to adjust our expectations depending on the child. However, not just the child's age, but other characteristics of the child. Let me give an example. I have a daughter who is very shy, very fearful in new situations. Well, I need to tell you also that shyness is something that some children are unfortunately born with. Their little bodies are different. We would never go up to somebody who is very tall and say to them, "Stop being so tall." But we go up to shy children all the time and say, "Stop being so shy." But it's not that easy. We need to help them overcome their natural fears. And so as parents, we would adjust our expectations for the child. Let me give an example. Again, my daughter is very shy, and one day we went into McDonald's and ordered our meal, and she got her toy. And she was disappointed because she already had that toy. So she said, "Dad, would you go get me a different toy?" And I looked quickly at the counter to make sure there weren't a lot of people. And then also the person who had helped us was really kind, really nice. And so I knew it was safe for my daughter. So I said, "No, if you want a toy, you'll need to go and get it yourself." And then I told her what to say. I helped her. But then I said, "Now, if you want it, you need to go and get it yourself." And I'll never forget my daughter. She looked at the counter. She looked at me. She looked at the toy and went, and then walked over to the counter. And she got the new toy, and when she came back, she was shaking. She was very scared, but she had a big smile on her face. And I said, "Did you get it?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "How did you feel? How do you feel?" And she said, "Scared, but happy." And so I told her how proud I was of her, and I asked her what she said again so she could repeat it and practice again. And it was a big moment, a big step for her. Now, I wouldn't have done that for her if it would have been a very scary situation. With my older daughter, not a problem. But for her, I had to adjust my expectations. And good parents will do this depending on what their child needs. The next thing that authoritative parents do is they enforce these expectations by setting limits or rules and insisting on obedience. Now, we need to understand that for young children, rules are very important. I'm not talking about controlling children. I'm talking about providing guidance, rules. And let me try to give an example of why that is important. Let's imagine that you and I as adults are out on a deserted road. A typhoon is coming, a bad storm, and we need shelter. There's only one big mansion, and so we go up to it, we knock on the door, nobody answers. So it's really raining, we need to get out of the storm, and the door's open a little bit, so we lean in and say, "Hello, is anybody there?" When nobody responds, we start exploring this mansion. It's a really interesting mansion because all of the doors are painted different colors. On some doors, they're blue. Some are red, some are yellow, some are green, some are orange. And as we start to explore, we notice that behind every blue door, there's a comfortable bed. Behind every red door, there's a warm fireplace. Behind every yellow door, there's food. But behind every orange door, there are poisonous snakes. And behind every green door, there are mean dogs. Well, soon as we recognize this pattern, we understand not to open any green or orange doors because they'll hurt us. Well, imagine if you entered the mansion, but behind every painted door, there was something different. Sometimes there was a warm shower, but the next time it was poisonous snakes. Sometimes the yellow door had food, but the next time there are mean dogs. There was no pattern, nothing to guide our actions. Soon, we would be too scared to open any more doors, or we'd get angry and frustrated at the confusion in this mansion. Well, that's how our children are when they come into this world and try to make sense of it. And when we give rules, guidance, it helps make structure for them. It helps guide them. And sure enough, some children, after we tell them the rules and ask them to obey and tell them why, because of the dogs and the snakes, if we just say as parents, don't do that because I said so, that doesn't help them know why. But if we explain why and then let children choose, sure enough, some children will try that green door. But once they see those mean dogs, they'll realize mom and dad or my teacher was right. I'm not going to do that anymore. And so by providing rules and guidance for our children, we help them make sense of the world around them. As we provide rules, we need to understand that our children's behavior. And as we insist on obedience and enact discipline, I'll talk about discipline some more. I'm not talking about punishing, hitting a child, but discipline. We need to understand our child's intentions. For example, sometimes children simply make mistakes. Sometimes, for example, a child may be helping do the dishes and may accidentally drop a plate or a glass and it shatters. This is very different than a child who you told numerous times, don't kick or throw a ball in the house. But then the child disobeys, throws a ball, and breaks a glass. In one of these instances, the child was disobedient. On the other hand, on the other child, it was just a mistake. And we as parents and teachers need to respond differently to disobedience versus a mistake and use those as teaching opportunities. The next thing that authoritative parents do is express warmth and affection and be responsive to their children. Our children need to know that we love them. They need to hear us say that we love them. I'd like to share an experience from one of my students. She told me how she had a mother who was very driven in her work. Her work was the most important thing to her. And this student said that she would trade all that money in just to have her mother's love and for her to show us she cares. Some parents think that they show love to their children by making money or by cleaning a house or cooking food. While this is important and it is a way to show love, it's not enough. Our children need to hear, I love you. We're proud of you. This is very important, especially for young children, because young children's minds don't understand a clean house or food on the table as a way to show love. They need to hear it. They need to feel it from us. These expressions of love are very important. Let me share an experience of another student. She says, I remember being very little and going up to my dad to give him a hug at church. There were many other men standing around him that he was talking to at the time. When I ran up and gave him a hug, he said to the other men, "Oh, she is just going through this hugging phase right now," as if he had to excuse what I had done. Looking back on it now, I can possibly understand why he said that. But at the time, I didn't understand. All I know is that as an 8-year-old, I felt rejected, and it has been very hard to get over. To this day, I can count the number of times my dad and I have hugged and said, I love you, on one hand. The lack of affection for this young woman led her to have difficulties expressing love to other people, including her own fiance. So for many children who do not receive love and affection from their parents, they won't know how to give it to other people. For other children, though, they may go exploring for that love and affection from other people. A trained social worker observed the following, quote, touching, a hug, a pat on the back, or an arm around the shoulder is necessary for the emotional health of both children and adults. It communicates affection and interest and should be given often. Children deprived of touching often fail to develop adequate self-esteem and frequently manifest severe psychological problems. Without physical contact, children can develop an intense craving for affection which they may try to meet outside the home. This need has led many into premature physical relationships. Close quote. As parents and teachers, we can't underestimate the security, the warmth, the love that children feel in the warm physical affection of parents and even teachers, the pat on the back, the encouragement that teachers can give. Let me give another example of my daughter. One day I returned home from work and my wife pointed out that my daughter was sad and kind of moping around. So I went to my daughter to try to find out what was wrong, and she wasn't too responsive. So I picked her up and started to tickle her until she started to laugh. And then I just sat down with her in my arms and said, "Carrie, what's wrong?" And at that point, she started to tell me about her bad day at school. She said, "Dad, nobody wanted to be my partner in school today." And as I talked to her about what had happened, it turned out that her friends just didn't want to work on the topic she had chosen. And so I said, "But Carrie, they still like you, right?" And she said, "Yeah, but it still hurts." And the only way she would have shared that is after I had taken a moment to show her time and to let her feel the safe, warm embrace of a hug from her dad. Very important that children can feel that trust and security and safety from their parents. Next thing that authoritative parents do is they listen patiently to the child's point of view and encourage participation in family decision making. I remember another time with my daughter in which she had to give a talk, and we were practicing this talk. But she got to a point to where she wouldn't say anything else. And I started to become frustrated because she wouldn't continue with her talk. And as I got more and more impatient and frustrated with her, she finally said, "Dad, I can't say that word. Can I use a different one?" To which I felt badly that I had gotten so upset over something so little. If I had just listened to my daughter and her needs, her concern, we could have easily changed a word to one that she could say more easily, and we wouldn't have had to go through that. We need to listen to our children. The next thing that authoritative parents do is engage in inductive reasoning. They reason about the consequences of actions with their children. Let's go back to the example of the mansion for a moment. If we're trying to explain what's behind orange doors and green doors, as it were, to our children, by simply saying, "You have to do this," or "You can't do that because I'm your teacher," or "because I'm your parent," doesn't help children learn right from wrong. They won't know how and why to make correct choices. Let me give an example of what we know about young children. There's a famous Swiss psychologist by the name of Piaget, and he did an experiment in which he took a child and placed in front of a model of 3 mountains. And there was something on each of the mountains. He then placed another child on the other side of the mountains. And this child couldn't see what was on the front of the mountains. But he would then ask the first child, "What does the other child see?" And without fail, young children always said, "That child sees the house, the thing that she could see, but the other child couldn't," showing that young children have a difficulty taking the perspective of others, of seeing what other people see and feel. And so we need to help them practice this. For example, an authoritative parent using inductive reasoning might do the following when a child hits somebody else. A parent might say, "We don't hit in this family." Now, imagine how ironic if at that point the parent said, "Come here so I can spank you to teach you that we don't hit." Doesn't quite work. Instead, the parent might take the child and say, "We don't hit, and this is why. How would you feel if I hit you?" The child will usually respond, sad or scared. "Right. So how do you think your sister felt when you hit her?" Remember, this doesn't happen naturally. Sometimes we as parents forget what it's like to be a child. And we think that we know how others may feel, but we forget that our children don't automatically think that way. And so for the first time when we ask a child, how do you think she felt when you hit her? And the child finally says, "Sad and scared?" Yes. So why don't we hit people? Because it makes them sad and scared. Exactly. But then your child might say, "But Dad, I really wanted the toy she had and she wouldn't give it to me." At that point, you can continue to help the child learn by saying, "Okay, how else could you have gotten the toy besides hitting?" "I don't know." "Well, let's think." And maybe you can help them come up with examples like trading their toy for the ball, or asking to play ball together, or sometimes just waiting to take a turn. But either way, this helps children learn skills. I refer to it as a toolbox of social skills. And each time you help them solve problems, you put another tool in their toolbox. Whereas if all you say is, "Don't do it because I said so," they don't have any tools in a toolbox. So good parents engage in inductive reasoning. The next thing that authoritative parents is good-natured and easygoing. We need to laugh with our children. We need to have fun with our children. I'm not saying here our role is to be their friends. We need to be their parents. We need to set rules, have expectations, and when needed, discipline. But we can do those things while still having fun with our children, still being good-natured with them. Years and years ago, some researchers wanted to compare moms and dads in their parenting. And of course, moms looked much better than dads as parents. So then they did some studies to see if dads could be taught to be good parents. And fortunately, we men aren't hopeless. We can be taught to be good fathers. But then they did something that was very important. They wondered if we fathers do anything good naturally. And they found that we, as fathers, tend to play with our children. We're really good at playing with our children. And research showed that that has a lot of benefits for children. Children who have fathers who play with them tend to do better in school, tend to do better with their friends socially. They control their emotions better. They persist at hard tasks longer. And so a lot of benefits if we just have fun and play with our children. Finally, authoritative parents need to be involved in their children's lives. This includes both mothers and fathers. But again, research has shown if we're involved in our children's lives, if we help them with homework, if we attend their activities, if we even sit down and play those video games that they're always playing or other things that they enjoy, we found that the children of these parents do much better. Howard W. Hunter said the following: "Earn the respect and confidence of your children through your loving relationship with them. A righteous father protects his children with his time and presence in their social, educational, and spiritual activities and responsibilities." Again, the outcomes are so positive socially, academically, all areas of a child's life when we're involved. And I can't begin to underscore how important this is. Again, let me share an experience of another student who once I was teaching a class on the effects of divorce on children. After the class, she told me her experience, that her dad left her when she was 2 years old, and she didn't see him until she was 17 years old. Then he reappeared and wanted to be a part of her life. You can imagine after all those years, she was very angry at him and bitter and didn't want to do anything with him. But she finally gave in and began to do some things with him and allow him to become involved in her life. Now, years later, as a college student, she shared, "I'm glad that he's started to become involved in my life. However, I still don't call him Dad, because I believe that is a title that must be earned." As parents and educators, we need to do those things in our children's lives that allow us to be not just mothers, but moms, not just fathers, but dads, and not just educators, but teachers. Now, let me just briefly highlight some of the negative parenting strategies, just so you can be aware of what they look like, but we won't spend as much time on them. First, a permissive parent. Permissive parenting is responsive, very warm, but undemanding. They're very tolerant in their parenting. They are nurturing, but they don't set any rules. They don't try to control at all, and they don't place any constraints on behavior. Again, we've already shown through the example of the mansion how important rules are. And unfortunately, these parents leave their children to go out in the world without any guidance and direction that rules provide them. Next, the authoritarian parent. Authoritarian parenting is a style that is demanding but low in responsiveness to children's rights and needs. Conformity and obedience are valued over open communication. In this parenting strategy, there is very little give and take. Parents simply say, "You do it because you're the child." These parents are cold and harsh and unresponsive. They're forceful. They use a lot of physical punishment. They hit, they spank, they yell, they grab. They engage in verbal hostility. They threaten. They put children down. They say things like, "Why can't you be a better kid? We wish you were like your sister." They're also very coercive. They make children feel guilty for the things that they do. These parents are uninvolved. They're unreasonable in their expectations. In fact, let me talk about expectations for a moment, because again, it's very important to have expectations for children. that we let them know what our expectations are for them. But they need to be reasonable. They can't be unattainable. Let me tell a kind of silly story to maybe highlight this. In the United States, we have an activity known as a rodeo, very popular in certain parts of the United States. In a rodeo, there's a cowboy who rides horses, uses a rope to lasso sheep or cows, and the main event, the highlight event, is the cowboy climbing on a wild bull and trying to stay on it for 8 seconds. Well, my son loves rodeos, and he wanted to be in a rodeo, and so they have an event for children in which children can try to ride a sheep. So my son climbed on a sheep and held on as long as he could, but eventually was bucked off or thrown off, and he went face first into the dirt. And he had dirt in his eyes and his nose and his mouth, and so he started to cry. I wanted to stay positive, so I went up and I held him and trying to get the dirt off his face and the tears wiped away. I said, "Isaac, nice job. Didn't you have fun?" To which my little 4-year-old boy said, "Yeah, Dad, but I don't want to ride the bull tonight." My little boy thought he was going to climb on that bull. But he needed to understand that that wasn't our expectation for him. We didn't expect him as a little boy to ride a bull. A sheep was just fine. But sometimes as parents, we expect our children to do things like ride the bull. And we set very high goals that are very difficult, even sometimes impossible for our children. And it makes it very hard for them. Let me tell a very sad story about my daughter. When my daughter started first grade, we had to move from one part of the United States to a different part. And so we put her in a brand new school. And in one of her first days at this new school, she had a spelling test. She didn't even know what she was going to be tested on, but she took the test. She missed one word on the spelling test. My daughter didn't miss another spelling word for 3 years. And every Friday, that's when the spelling tests were, I would always ask my daughter, "How was the spelling test today?" And she would always say, 10-10, Daddy. Perfect score, Dad. And to which I'd always compliment her and tell her, "Nice job." Well, after 3 years of this, we were having a family meeting one night. And we were talking, and she started to ask some questions about our family's beliefs. And as I started to talk to her about the expectations that we have, about the things that we expect our children and all of us to do, I stopped and I said, "But Jess, we all make mistakes, and I want you to know that no matter what mistake you make, no matter what you do wrong, your mom and your dad will always love you." Well, my daughter started to cry. And she said, "Does that count in spelling tests too?" My daughter had thought for those 3 long years that if she ever missed a word on a spelling test, I wouldn't be happy with her. Even though I thought I was just complimenting her on her performance, she thought that what I was doing was making it so that if she didn't get a perfect score, I wouldn't be happy with her. And for 3 years, my daughter had been very anxious, very stressed every week when she took a spelling test. And in fact, the pressure was so extreme, she felt, that she even admitted a few years later that she had cheated once or twice on a spelling test. That was how much pressure she felt to do well. Our children need to know that while we have expectations, that they will make mistakes and that we still will love them. And we need to make sure that they know that our expectations aren't impossible, that they are attainable. And we need to really be careful of the expectations we place on our children. Now, some people who are listening to me today may be thinking, well, if a little stress, if a little fear will make a child do well in school, then it's good. And again, I would say that's not the way to get them to do well in school, because the outcomes are very damaging. Let me share an experience to highlight this. In the United States, at my university, I had the opportunity to have a graduate student from here in China. She came to work with me and she told me her history. She was a very, very smart young woman. Her parents had set high expectations for her, and she had done her best to reach them. She had graduated with the highest grades in her high school. She went on to one of the best medical schools in mainland China. But at the end of her first year of medical school, she was miserable. She felt terrible about herself. She was depressed, and she had a lot of negative thoughts. Why? Because this bright young woman was ranked only 11th out of 45 students. And in her mind, that wasn't good enough because of the expectations that had been set for her. If we as teachers and parents set the expectations that only number one is acceptable, then we set most of our children up to fail. And the outcomes can be very negative. In this part of the world, as well as other parts of the world, we know there is a rising suicide rate. Now, we don't know all the reasons why young people commit suicide, but it makes me wonder about the pressure they feel from the expectations that we put on them. Again, expectations are important, but they need to be attainable and not unreasonable. The next type of parenting that I'd like to share with you just briefly, a negative form of parenting, is the overprotective parent. This is a parenting style that is overprotective and over-controlling. These parents don't allow children to make decisions for themselves. They don't let children try new things. They try to get the child to depend totally on the parent. So again, that's a very negative style of parenting because of the outcomes. Indeed, let me now turn to the outcomes that researchers have shown exist for children of the different types of parenting. Children who have authoritative parents, researchers have shown, tend to be happy. They tend to have high self-esteem and self-control. They tend to do better socially. They have better values and morals. And it makes sense because these children want to take on their parents' and their teachers' values. Because of the way their parents have treated them, they want to be like them. And so they become filled with the values that their parents and their teachers want them to have. They do well in school. They can take the perspective of others. Think about the consequences of their actions. They're friendly. They're liked by their peers. They can control their emotions, and they have fewer problems like depression, loneliness, and suicidal thoughts. And also fewer problems like aggression, drug use, and hyperactivity. And these children have better communication skills. The outcomes for these children are immensely positive. Now, in contrast, let me show you the outcomes for children of permissive parents. Very quickly. These children tend to be impulsive, disobedient, rebellious. They tend to depend on their parents. They don't persist at something that's hard. They give up easily. And they do poorly in school. And they engage in drug use. Outcomes for children of authoritarian parents. These children tend to be anxious, withdrawn, or hostile and angry. They take all of their frustrations with their parents yelling and screaming at them and hitting them, and it boils over, and so they become aggressive. They get angry. They think other people are out to get them. They're not liked by their peers. They engage in drug and alcohol use, and they don't communicate well with others. Finally, the outcome for overprotective parents. These parents tend to have children who are anxious, fearful, they don't feel good about themselves, and they tend to be rejected by their friends. Now, some people listening may think, well, that's research in the United States. Does it really apply here in Taiwan and other parts of Asia? I'd like to share with you briefly that indeed it does. All of the findings that I've just shared have been found here, as well as other countries and cultures throughout the world. But let me focus just on a moment on some of the research that my colleagues and I have done in China. I want you to see that we have identified all of these parents. We see parents in Asia who are authoritative, but we see others who are more authoritarian. As you will see in the slides, we've identified each of these forms of parenting. We've seen parents who are warm, who use inductive reasoning, who grant choices to their children. Whereas we also see parents who are physically coercive, who are verbally hostile, and who are very punitive. They punish by spanking and hitting. And then the other types of parenting that we've shown. We've also seen that there are some aspects of parenting that tend to be very unique to Chinese culture. We see parents who try to encourage modesty, encourage a child to be humble and respectful. We see parents engage in shaming, however, again trying to guilt their child into doing what they should. I'd like to share with you just briefly some of the outcomes that we have found for these types of parents. Again, these are just a few findings. I have chosen just one behavior, aggression, and to show the outcomes of parenting in China. But I could show just as many on other things like drug use, like shyness, school performance. So this is just one small piece to show you that these are findings can be seen here in China as well. These parenting styles work here. First, parents who are accepting of their children and who are warm have children who engage in less aggression. Another study with authoritative parents, again with 8-year-old children this time, less aggressive. Another study found that authoritarian parents, though, had children who were more aggressive. And you have in your slides, you can see study after study show the same things. Positive parenting associated with less aggression, authoritarian, harsh parenting related to more aggression. Again, I could have condensed that all into just a little bit, but I wanted you to really see that these parenting styles work. If we will put them to use in our homes and in our classrooms, we will have children with better outcomes. Now, I've tried to share with you, with the example of a mansion, why rules are needed. But let me begin to wrap up now by trying to show why maybe being harsh, threatening children, and hitting children just doesn't work. I didn't have the exact statistics for here in Asia, so I apologize. I'm going to use some numbers that I use with my college students in the United States, but you will get the meaning of what I am saying. The average 4-year-old in the United States is 37 inches tall and weighs 30 pounds. The average 20-year-old man is 71 inches tall and weighs 152 pounds. The average 20-year-old woman is 66 inches and weighs 126 pounds. Now I want you to think of the ratio of an average 4-year-old to an average 20-year-old. What a 4-year-old sees when a 20-year-old is coming to yell at them or hit them is what a 20-year-old, or what you and I might see in an 11.5-foot tall, 760-pound monster. If you had an 11.5-foot tall, 760-pound person coming at you angry, yelling, and ready to hit you, how would you feel? Would you want to be with that person? I don't know about you, but the older I became, the less I would want to do with that. I would be so scared and so tired of being frightened by that huge person that I wouldn't want anything to do with them. I wouldn't believe what they believed. I wouldn't do what they do. And so there is no way that we can ever get children to internalize our values, our beliefs, to do the things that we want them to do by forcing them to do it. Now, if immediately it may look like it works, because that small child may be so scared, they'll do it when you're there. But research has shown that while it may work right there in the moment, over time, it doesn't work. They'll do what you want in your presence, but when you are gone, they no longer will. It's only if we engage in authoritative parenting that our children will internalize our values, that they will acquire the skills and abilities to succeed in school, in work, in interactions with other people. Let me close by telling you an experience I had. One time I was in Romania. I work with students in orphanages in Romania. And one of my first trips, I walked into a room, and there was a little blind girl just lying on the floor. Nobody caring for her, nobody playing with her. Well, I went up to her. I wanted to spend some time with her, and I tried to pick her up. And she started to scream and back away from me. Well, I didn't want to scare her, so I wanted to help her, so I tried patting her softly on the back. And as I did this, she started to laugh. And I thought that was strange, so I started to do it some more, and I realized she was very ticklish on her back. So as I started to just gently tickle her back, she then let me pick her up. And then I was able to just hold this little girl and spend some time with her, talk to her, hold her. After a few minutes, my colleague came and told me that I had to keep going. People were waiting for me. So I said a few last words to this little girl, and then I put her back on the floor, and I turned to walk away. As I was walking away, she started to scream. And when I turned around, I saw something that I'll never forget. This little blind girl was searching all over, trying to find me, trying to find the person who had given her love, who had paid attention to her, who had held her. And unfortunately, I did something next that I will always feel bad about. I just turned around and walked out of the room. I hope everybody who is listening to me right now will make a commitment that as you go back to your own children or to your classroom, that you will commit that no child that's ever placed in your care will ever know what it feels like to have you walk away from them. Let's commit that every child that we interact with will feel warmth, will feel love from us. And as we do that and try our best, each of us, instead of just being mothers and fathers and educators, we will do the things to earn the titles of mom